Christian Horner has banked a huge payoff after being fired by Red Bull and is now free to explore an F1 comeback in 2026. John, the official statement officially confirming Horner's exit from the team was predictably gushing from both sides, but we know the truth of this matter is much more complicated. Tell us first what you know about how much Red Bull has had to fork out to pay Horner off.
Yeah, so this deal was announced today. A little statement on the Red Bull Racing website. Didn't say very much, just said Christian Horner has left the team as of today. Nice comments from him, nice comments from Oliver Mintzlaff. But from what we understand, this is the result of pretty lengthy negotiations since he was kind of removed from his duties after the British Grand Prix. There's no official news from Red Bull's side or even Horner's side on what it comprises. But from what we understand, it's about $100 million over what was a 5-year spell. His contract ran until the end of 2030. So it sounds quite a lot, but remember, he wasn't just team principal of Red Bull Racing. He was chief of Red Bull Powertrains. He's in charge of Red Bull Advanced Technologies, in charge of Red Bull Marketing. So there's a lot of not only kind of salary and income there, potential bonuses, potential commissions. All these sort of elements were important. So while it seems a big figure over 5 years, it's probably in line with what a lot of other F1 team bosses earn.
Well, it's an eye-watering amount of money. I mean, it's pretty much a big chunk of a good F1 team's running budget, isn't it? So you've explained a little bit about why he had such a multifaceted role, but it's still a huge amount of money. Why are they so keen to spend so much money to finally get rid of him?
I think once their mind was made up that they did not want to continue with Christian Horner, and this happened in the days after the British Grand Prix, this is the only way that these things get settled. If the terms of Christian Horner's contract, whether he stayed in employment till the end of 2030, Red Bull felt they didn't want that to happen, then these things get settled like this. There are payoffs, these contracts are brought out, there's big negotiations. A lot of these things happen in Formula One. People move, contracts get cancelled, payouts happen. We often don't find about them, we don't find about the terms. But I think details of this have come out because this is such high profile, and it was obviously such a big story after the British Grand Prix.
Yeah, it was, and it's been very quiet since then. It's nearly 2 months since, well, as the audience will understand, Horner was fired by Red Bull. So what has taken so long to get us from the point at which he seemed to be out of Red Bull to the point where he's now actually properly out of Red Bull?
I think these are the formal steps of the process. I think the Red Bull, kind of the official line from them after the British Grand Prix wasn't that Christian Horner had been sacked. He'd been kind of relieved of active duties, which basically meant stepping back from being team principal of Red Bull Racing, stepping back from the role with Powertrains, Advanced Technology and Marketing. So it's like one of their racing drivers being moved aside and parked in the simulator. You can be relieved of your racing duties, but you still remain under contract. So while Christian Horner wasn't team principal of Red Bull Racing in active terms, the contract was still there. And so what's had to be sorted out now was negotiating the exit, negotiating the terms of the contract to be cancelled. So this gets agreed, because the other option is basically then you go to court. And I think that's something that neither Christian nor Red Bull would have wanted.
No, it gets messy, doesn't it? And also a bit more public once you go legal. But now he is free. What about Horner's next move? Everyone wants to know when and if Horner can make a comeback to F1. Some people have talked about maybe he should take up the reins at Cadillac, even though they already have a team principal under contract. There's been rumours of a potential buyout of the Renault Alpine team with Flavio Briatore and Bernie Ecclestone. What can you tell us about what Horner's allowed to do now that he's properly out of Red Bull?
So from what we understand in terms of the framework of this deal is that it isn't like some other kind of contracts where people are forced into years and years of gardening leave and they can't work for anybody else. From what we understand, he is allowed back in at some point next season. Now, the specific date we don't know, but from what I'm told, it's somewhere between around after the first flyaway races of next year, so we've got Australia in March, China, Japan, Bahrain, Saudi. So somewhere in that framework, before the summer break, he will be allowed to start work for another team if he so desires from then, which then opens up, I think, 2 scenarios primarily for him. So now he can decide, does he attack and speak to teams that have availability? Cadillac, he was rumoured at, but Dan Tauris, they're kind of the big chief there of the team, said absolutely no way, we're not interested. Graham Loudon, our team principal, we're 100% behind him. He's put the team together. We're sticking with Loudon. So I think we can park the Cadillac rumours. Alpine and Aston Martin, I think, are two very interesting prospects. Alpine, we know Christian Horner's good friends with Flavio Briatore. Alpine's obviously going under a restructuring under Briatore. It's moved away from the Renault Works engine deal. It's gone towards Mercedes customers for next season. And it would give Christian, almost a clean slate to, recreate a team that's at the bottom, pushing it forwards. Now, Flavio Briatore at the Dutch Grand Prix was asked about Horner. So, what about the rumours of a potential buyout from Christian? It could even involve Bernie Ecclestone and Flavio. And Flavio's words were very specific about, at this moment, Christian isn't in Formula One. At this moment, it's not happening. But it was very much at this moment. And I call that, in F1 terms, the non-denial denial. So you've got to look very carefully what he said. So at that moment, it's true, Christian wasn't available. But come next, towards the start of next year, it could be on the cards. So I think that's one possibility. The other interesting one is Aston Martin. I know they've got a lot of strong leadership in place already. Andy Cowell's doing a great job as CEO, just kind of rebuilding it, pushing this team forward and getting ready for 26. Mike Crack, runs the team on a racing weekend. But that doesn't rule out someone like Christian coming in and maybe taking a bigger picture role, wider for the organisation as it pushes on into 26. So that could be an option as well. I think that cannot be ruled out. The third scenario, which I think is potentially more interesting, especially because we know Christian isn't allowed to start work at the start of next season, is we get to Melbourne next year. There are going to be some teams that have under-delivered massively. There are going to be some team principals that are under pressure, if it have promised all the resource they threw into 26 for the new rules era hasn't worked. So do teams that are frustrated, they think the team boss has failed, they know Horner's available and could start work in 1 month, 2 months or 3 months' time, decide this is the moment we go. So we could get a team boss silly season very early on in 26.
What do you think Horner's mindset will be? Because the Alpine option kind of makes sense, provided Renault are prepared to sell the team. Otherwise, that gang of three can't get their hooks in. The Aston Martin option kind of makes sense because Andy Cowell effectively took the team principal role under his CEO title at the start of the year. But you've got the confounding factor of Adrian Newey, and as we understand it, the relationship between him and Horner wasn't great in the latter days of Newey's stint at Red Bull. There seem to be problems there, or at least situations Horner can't control. So is he just better off sitting back and just waiting for 2026 to unfold and for an opportunity like maybe Ferrari, which he was once linked with, to unfold?
Yeah, on to two topics there. On Newey, I think it's just quite interesting, the dynamics of their relationship, because I think while we hear talk of conflict, and I think the circumstances around Christian last year were a factor in Adrian deciding he wanted to leave Red Bull and not extend his contract. We hear stories that they have dinner together, they go to events together, they've achieved a lot of success together. So I don't think it impossible that the pair of them could renew a working association. And in terms of Christian's overall mindset, he's not spoken, I think he's not been allowed to speak since he was relieved of his duties. But I did an interview with him last, I think, September, October time at the factory. We just talked about management mindsets and how he felt teams could be successful. And there was quite a lot of talk from him then about, needing to be in complete control, that you need to, the boss has to take charge and not be answering to superiors all the time, because teams need to react quick. They need to attack every area as fast and as aggressive as possible. So I think if Christian is going towards a team, he will want a lot of control. He will want to have his fingers in lots of pies and get the entire organisation structure, all the elements of it, working as one into his vision that can push forward. Because I think that is the only way you can make things work in Formula One.
Yeah, I think that suggests it's more likely he would do something like the Alpine thing, which, as you said before, would need building up from the bottom, whereas something like Aston Martin, they're already building a project with lots of big names that you've already listed. So that feels like a more difficult fit. Coming back to the relationship with Red Bull, obviously we know it was quite fractious behind the scenes, despite what they say now in their public statements and public farewells. How important is it for Red Bull to have that closure, to finally close the chapter on Horner? And obviously they've had a bit of an uptick recently, 2 wins on the bounce for Max Verstappen, lots of enthusiastic talk about new team principal Laurent Mekies and the role he's had to play. How much of that newfound success is purely down to the change of team principle, or does Horner deserve some credit for the success Red Bull is still enjoying now?
I think Red Bull will be happy, although it's cost them a lot of money. I think they'll be happy that they can, draw a line under this now, that it's time to start its new era and can move on. So there's no legacy now with Christian in terms of the way they operate the team on a day-by-day basis. It's finished. It's gone. They're going different ways. In terms of the impact Laurent's making, I think what we're seeing at the moment, and it's been an interesting weekend in Baku because suddenly Max Verstappen has re-emerged as a potential championship threat. McLaren are, fearful about his potential and where that car's at. And I think this is a legacy of both what Christian did at the team in terms of leaving behind, a strong car, a good engineering structure. The Monza upgrade, for example, that was, talked about so much and critical to the win there, was something Christian brought in and actually ran at Silverstone the weekend before he was fired. So these upgrades that achieved great success at Monza and hailed as part of a new era are actually something that played a part in the final days of Christian Horner at the team. So, but beyond that, I think Laurent's also he keeps repeating this risk-on approach. I think he wants to push the team a bit harder to different engineering directions, be more aggressive with tyres, push on. I think he wants to find out what the limits of this team are. I think he wants to go into 26 knowing what is possible, where are the weaknesses, where are the strengths. And often you can only find that by stress testing organisations. So he wants to stress test the engineers, he wants to stress test the simulator, stress test the drivers, stress test the whole thing. And at the moment, that's paying off. It didn't work in Hungary. They took a setup direction that was completely wrong, but they've learned their lessons. Now things are pushing on, and I think we're in a really interesting phase of the championship now as we come away from Baku, where once again Red Bull was the class of the field.